Hi, everyone. Kumar Danatran here with the Meridian Point. And today I'm really pleased to introduce you to Ron Healy, a consultant, writer, and entrepreneur who's turned regulatory complexity into his competitive advantage. Splitting his time between Dublin and Northern Italy, Ron works at the intersection of disruption, innovation, and regulation. Lots of shuns there in a row, helping organizations from Ireland's National Railway to Fortune 500 companies navigate change by finding hidden opportunities in compliance requirements. He's launched EPAL Global, a startup that solves a 2.4 billion euro problem in cross-border e-commerce by cleverly combining 3 different regulations into one streamlined solution. But what makes Ron unique is his philosophy. He's an anarchist with a small a who believes the status quo should never be assumed correct, and that Agile isn't a methodology, it's really a mindset for adapting to reality. He's here to share how everyday disruption creates innovation opportunities most people miss. So without further ado, let me pull Ron into to the stage here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite.
So Ron, before I launch into the questions, maybe you can give us sort of a high level of how did you get here? How did you get to this place where you are now, sort of looking for opportunity and regulations?
Sure. My background is I'm a product manager, a product innovation manager now, but my background is pretty unusual for somebody who ends up in this career. Most people end up going through business analysis, product management as a sort of an obvious path, but my background started in transport and industry, in London Transport, specifically as a driver, and then into management during a time of massive change in London Transport. And obviously change leads opportunities for innovation. Innovation isn't always great, it isn't always right, but I did notice there was a lot of opportunities for innovation, most of which weren't taken. And that really did stick with me at that time. I had a career change after about 12 years. I did spend, strangely enough, 3 years as a sign language interpreter for the Metropolitan Police in the UK, which is very different. But that was a sort of an interim thing. But I had a change of career when I decided to go to college in my 30s. And then I went into the computer science industry, if you like. I've always had computers in my background since late 70s, early 80s. But for me, they were always just a passing fad almost, or something to do in my spare time. But after doing a computer science degree, after a few years after that, I did a research master's, and then I became a lecturer. So that was essentially my second career. And that gave me a real opportunity to look at what can technology do. Innovation and transformation is one thing, but technology-driven innovation and transformation opens up a whole different suite of opportunities. After about 6 years of that, I quit academia and became a business analyst, and then went up through the traditional route, if you like, business analysis, product management, and then product innovation. But I've always had an abiding fascination with the legislation and regulation, always, ever since I was a child. I've always believed that if you understand the rules and you can apply them to your advantage, nobody can complain, particularly the regulators, and these are the guys with the big sticks. So whenever I see an opportunity to use a regulation or a legislation to my advantage, that's something that I can't really turn down, so I explore the possibilities. And so that's kind of where, if you like, my set of skills, that's pretty unusual, regulation-driven innovation, essentially comes from.
Yeah, that's fascinating. All of your sort of your career changes, your education changes. I meet lots of people on this show like yourself that have gone through some level of change and disruption in their career, but maybe not quite to the extent that you have. From driver to a sign language interpreter to a business analyst to getting your degree as a in computer science to sort of then following a more traditional path to product management. That's really quite interesting. In some ways, it mirrors mine. I started in restaurants and somehow found my way into coaching and agile and leadership roles. But I do credit my experience in the restaurant business for giving me sort of a better sense of customer centricity, product life cycles in restaurants are measured in minutes, not in weeks or months or years. It's literally customer comes into your restaurant and you have to serve them their meal, and you have to do so with a smile and make sure it's of high quality and all of those things. But anyway, so you found this niche in terms of regulation, right? So you see it as an opportunity to sort of look at the regulations that are in place and how you can take advantage of them. What do most organizations miss when regulations change?
I think the first thing that happens when regulations change or are proposed to change, which usually happens, is usually a lead time. What normally happens is organizations immediately think, oh no, here we go again. There's a change being forced on us, and that's seen as a negative. My view is that's a positive, and the reason why I see that as a positive is because, well, change is forced on us. Okay,
Yeah.
How do we take it? How do we take advantage of that? How do we get ahead of the game? I've had clients in the past who looked at regulations that were 5 years away and built products that essentially were then the leaders when the regulations changed. And that was illuminating for me. One of my earlier clients as a consultant was specifically for that 4 years ahead of a regulation change, and it was a Europe-wide regulation change. So it was an opportunity to say, okay, what are we going to do about this? And when everybody else is panicking, how do we sell them our product? Because change is going to happen. And I think that's what most organizations miss first and foremost, is that it's not going away. You can't bury your head in the sand. So look at it as an opportunity. Get ahead, get early, and understand what does the regulation mean for your existing operations, if relevant. And that's my entry point, I guess, to most of my consultancy work, is that usually there's some regulation has either changed or is about to change, and somebody will, or a client will contact me and say, okay, what does this mean to us? And I wrote an article in 2016 that coined the phrase minimum compliant product, because for me, that's the first thing you must do. For those of us in product development, we're all familiar with minimum viable product and minimum marketable product. But if a product is not compliant, it's neither viable nor marketable.
Yeah.
And so for me, the first thing you need to say is, well, is it compliant? A lot of products are not compliant with the regulations. We've had, only in the last 24 hours, we've had X, formerly Twitter, in trouble with the European Union. There's a Grok. That's a product that was both marketable and viable. It's not compliant. So, things like that are kind of where I start. And once an organization or a product is compliant, then you can see, okay, what's the next thing I need to do to be, gain a competitive advantage.
Do you see where in some cases products that are not compliant are still so successful that it doesn't really matter to the organization? They just pay the fine, or they because of their market share and their influence, they are able to change the regulation?
Yeah, or they just ignore the regulation. There's an example that I use somewhat humorously when I'm talking to executives about minimum compliance, is about whether a compliance needs to be, whether a product needs to be compliant, is the illicit drugs trade. The illicit drugs are both marketable and viable, but they're not compliant, and yet the industry, or at least the sector, is still there. So it's not that a product has to be compliant. It's just, if you want to be compliant, then look for a competitive advantage by doing so.
Yeah, I suppose there's always a cost benefit, right? So what's the cost of compliance, and what are the benefits of compliance? And if you're not compliant, what's the cost of not being compliant? And is it still viable and marketable?
and there has been, one of my former clients, who's a big telecoms company who I won't name, when they engaged me to look at the minimum thing that they needed to do to become compliant with a regulation change, my advice to them was, don't bother. After doing analysis, I didn't just say don't bother. After doing analysis of the cost versus benefit, and the cost was capped at 1 year, capped at a small amount of money, potential fines and so on, and then a regulation change after that would mean it was no longer relevant. So they essentially ignored it for a year, because that was the right thing to do from a business point of view.
Yeah.
It's probably worth making the point that while a lot of my interactions with clients, I engage with people in legal departments and regulators and so on, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm compliant with all regulations. I'm sure I break as many regulations as anybody else.
Right. Good point. One of the things you said in our preparatory call was that Agile is whatever works at the time for that project to deliver value. And you push back against that, the notion that if it's not Scrum, it's not Agile, that mentality, right? Mm-hmm. So walk us through your thinking. It's very much aligned with mine, by the way. It's whatever works. Where does the sort of the Agile community, the traditionalist, if you will, get it wrong?
I think I'd start by saying they don't get it wrong. I'd say more likely they don't get it as right as they could, which is different, right? Because we have to all start from somewhere. A methodology is a good place to start, and Agile isn't always the right thing to do. Agile ways of working aren't always right. If I'm going in for brain surgery, I don't want trial and error. I don't want experimentation. I want somebody who's going to follow a checklist like a waterfall. If you're sending a Mars mission, you don't want to try that. Just fire it in one direction and see if it goes according to plan. So sometimes Agile is wrong. It's the wrong methodology for a given scenario. The other side of it is sometimes we impose structure on what we think is Agile. And Scrum is an example. I've used Scrum. I've taught Scrum. I've implemented Scrum in lots of organizations. I think it's ideal for some organizations. But Scrum is a methodology, whereas for me, Agile is a mindset. Yeah. And when you have people who say, if you don't do it my way, it's not Agile, by definition, they're not Agile. The whole point of Agile is that it's a continuum, in my view. One of your recent podcasts was about the kind of binary, traditional waterfall versus Agile. And to me, they're not binary. They're complementary. Some things should be done traditional waterfall slightly more than others. And even within a given project, my current client is a national railway. You're not going to build a railway system or a new track or buy trains using Agile methodologies. Sometimes you're more to the left of the continuum towards traditional waterfall, stage gates and milestones. And sometimes you need to be more towards the right, a bit more experimental, a bit more innovative, a bit more risk-taking.
Yeah, I'm just, there's a live audience. I just want to encourage them to ask you questions if they have any.
Yeah, way to throw me under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think I remember the episode with the guests. We were talking about Agile, sort of this binary thing. And you're right, it's not a binary thing. And I think he also argued that point that it's not binary. It's more of a continuum. And, that you can still be Agile, use the mindset, follow the mindset, or have that mindset, employ that mindset in more traditional waterfall-like projects, right? So they're not mutually exclusive.
I'd also add the point that even, you get a lot of criticism, for example, of the Scaled Agile framework and things like it, because, people say that's not Agile. What it is, if you're coming from something that's more waterfall. So being a little bit more Agile is always a good thing, I believe. Doesn't mean you have to be fully committed to throw away the tools and experiment.
Right. I totally agree with that. You're launching a new company this month. Is that right?
Yeah, we're in soft launch at the moment.
Yeah, and it's meant to solve a cross-border e-commerce tax problem by combining 3 different regulations. Can you take us through the thinking? How did you identify this opportunity, and what's the regulation or loophole in the regulations that you're exploiting?
Yeah, I'll start by just summarizing briefly what it is and what it does, and then I'll explain the background. EPAL Global is the name of the company, and epalglobal.com is the website. There's some explainer videos on YouTube if people want to search for EPAL Global. But ultimately what it is it's a plugin and an API essentially that allows cross-border merchants who want to sell cross-border and just find it too complicated and too difficult because of all the rules and regulations and demands and so on, to do it easily. Cross-border sales, particularly from, let's say, the US or UK into the EU, huge industry. The initial, when I looked at this first, it was around 1 billion packages a year, went up to 2.4 billion over the last couple of years, and it's now estimated to be 4 billion packages per year. That's a sizable problem, and the vast majority of those packages are very, very low value. We're not talking about container loads of things coming in from China. We're talking about one-off packages being sent from American direct-to-consumer website or Shopify or WooCommerce
Mm-hmm.
directly to a consumer in the EU.
I see. Okay.
The difficulty for most merchants in that scenario is they don't understand the complexities of cross-border trade, and you wouldn't expect them to. They're used to selling domestically. There's one price on the website, and that's what the customer pays, maybe with shipping. When you sell cross-border, there's a hugely complex series of steps that have to be carried out in a sequence in order to calculate what is the price that the customer has to pay to avoid having to pay additional additional customs duties, taxes, and handling charges on top of that. So essentially what EPAL Global does is it orchestrates best-in-class capabilities from some other vendors and exposes it as a plugin or an API that a merchant can use directly in their e-commerce shop invisibly. And what it does is it calculates from the given price that you're selling domestically, remove domestic tax, add destination tax, calculate customs duties, add shipping, calculate tax on shipping, calculate tax on customs duties, add the whole lot together, split the shipping tax across all of the products so you can reclaim the ones that are returned, and give one price to the customer. And the goal there is that the customer will pay that price and will never have any surprises, or worse, will never return the product because they're hit with additional charges on them.
That's really clever. So is it for services as well that you have to account for taxes, or is it just physical products?
Services is a different set of requirements, and we may look at services in the future. We're looking now at digital products. Initially, it's for physical products because those are the ones that are physically being stopped by customs.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are rejected at the door by the customer who has additional charges to pay. Once we're more mature, we'll explore the digital products, and digital services is a different set of issues altogether. Not sure if we'll get there.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I do have things that I sell, courses, things like that, and I get customers from all over the world, and I hadn't really thought about this. I'm like, ooh, am I compliant?
One of my former clients has a product that calculates digital services taxes, for cross-border delivery, because the main reason why this is an issue in recent years is because the rules changed in 2021. The marketplace regulations changed, and this was another one of the regulations that triggered this opportunity. And really, the opportunity was driven by the regulation change, right? So regulation-driven innovation. And because tax is now calculated at the point of consumption, it's a consumption tax rather than a sales tax at the point of sale. That's essentially what changed the rules. The same happened for digital services and digital goods, and more is going to happen for digital goods selling cross-border.
Yeah, it sounds like a really a good idea. You said soft launch this month, and you're going to be launching, a hard launch later on.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's serving a need. What are the early returns? What are you seeing, and how are you gauging, success so far?
Success is really the product works as expected. We have a couple of initial customers who are helping us to make sure that the product does work as expected. We have engaged as much as we can with the early potential customers. Unfortunately, most product managers would love to engage with customers all the time, and I'm a big fan of product professionals like Marty Kagan, Teresa Torres, people like that, who say, look, engineering, customers, and the product, the engineering, the marketing, all have to be aligned on what's happening. When you're building a product that nobody's ever seen before, it's very difficult to get customers to dive in. We don't have a lot of credibility or track record to show. However, we are getting a lot of interest from even platforms. We're talking to one of the platforms. It's probably fair to say, we're allowed to say, we're talking to WooCommerce right now about their tax and duty calculation. There is no single plugin on any of the platforms that do tax and duty calculation in one go. So we're getting a lot of interest. We're making sure we don't bring on too many customers too quickly and the thing will fall over, the usual product launch safeguards. But most of the people that we've talked to at very small SME level, all the way up to executive level platforms and even postal operators, very interested in it.
That's good to hear. I'll be definitely tracking the progress of and the evolution of the company and the work that you do. I'm definitely interested in that. I'm going to shift topics here. You mentioned you're drawn to disruption with the lowercase d.
Yeah,
the everyday kind, right, rather than the capital D disruption, the big changes, right?
yeah.
What would you say is the difference, and why does everyday disruption interest you more?
I think the reason why everyday disruption and disruption without a capital D and anarchy without a capital A, I think the reason why they appeal to me is because I love change. I'm one of those, some people hate change. I love change. I live for change. For me, change is the thing that makes life interesting, and change is always happening anyway. So it's a question of, well, how do you take advantage of that? How do you adapt to it? But actually, more interesting, I was thinking about this after I read the initial questions, that disruption with a capital D is easier to achieve. It's very, very easy to achieve a small disruption. And if you can control the disruption, you can control the outcome of the disruption. So if disruption is going to happen, whether it be your customers are behaving in a way that you didn't expect, or your competitors are behaving in a way that you didn't expect, then you're reacting to it.
Yeah.
But if you're controlling it, then you can make other people react to what you want.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean in a manipulative way. It can be just that we've all seen the classic, this is the way we do it here.
Yeah.
And you change something like that and you say, okay, well, we don't have to.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of cases when I'm working with clients in transformation, we start with the really small wins, really small disruptions. Why are we using this spreadsheet instead of that, that widget? Why are we using this process instead of that button? And small changes like that can make, especially when they give people who are affected by the transformation a positive outcome, and then you get buy-in. And those small disruptions are much easier to set the scene for larger disruptions, because people will see that the outcome is likely to be better than they expected.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, it follows the Kaizen philosophy or mentality, right? Small changes that over time yield a big change, right? You don't really see it, you don't realize it, but these small changes, they add up and they build it to something very, very substantial.
Yeah.
It's also something that we at Agile Meridian, we talk about: either you disrupt or you're disrupted. And
Yeah.
so it's much better to be disrupting rather than being disrupted, in my opinion. So it kind of follows what you were just saying, that it's a way to sort of dictate the pace of change and the things that you want to see. So I definitely I love that concept.
One of the things it does also, if you're constantly looking for the opportunity to disrupt, is it gives you the constant opportunity to innovate.
Yeah.
And the two go hand in hand. And of course, if you're disrupting small pieces, innovating small pieces, then you're agile. So it's a kind of the holy grail or the holy triumvirate. Small innovations are, again, very easy to achieve, and they can be very, very effective.
Yeah, I love that. You're speaking music to my ears, Ron. You've been working with, if I may say this, Ireland's National Railway. Is that okay to say? I hope it's okay to say.
On Irish Rail.
Yeah, right. And I work with Amtrak here locally in the U.S. And like Amtrak, Irish Rail does not focus on profit, right? They care about providing service.
Yep.
How do you drive innovation when the mindset is more around service and traditional business metrics don't really apply?
I suppose in a way it depends on what metrics do apply. In the case of Irish Rail, the metrics that apply are ridership, essentially. How do we increase ridership? How do we make the system more efficient, and so on? And even things like booking tickets and making reservations, making all of these things easier, promoting inclusion, promoting accessibility. All of these things have their own individual metrics. A couple of the innovations Irish Rail are working on at the moment that I'm involved in, one of them in particular is, as we speak right now, going through the proof of concept phase, which is installing Bluetooth beacons in train stations so that people who are blind or mobility impaired can navigate through the train station in the same way that you would at Google Maps, but indoors. So this is a pretty unique environment, but since the focus is customer service rather than profit or return on investment, well, then it makes sense. What also is important is that you have the right people in the positions of authority and decision making who will back it, because no innovation happens without the backing of the people who pay the check.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to remember that idea. See if it's something that that the local train companies are thinking about or doing anywhere.
And share notes afterwards.
Yeah, there you go. You're a prolific writer, blog writer.
I don't know about prolific, but I do like to get my thoughts down on digital paper. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have a specific process by which you do that. Can you tell us about your creative process and how do you sort of get these articles out?
So normally what happens is I have a thought that's going around in my head for a significant amount of time, and if it bothers me enough, then I think it's probably worth just getting it out of my head, because otherwise it's keeping me awake at night. And or occasionally I'll just have a flash of inspiration of a particular thought or phrase, and I think that's an interesting. I'll come back to that. I make a note. If I come back to it and I don't remember what it was, I just delete it. If I come back to it and I think, well, that was interesting, yeah, I must make some notes on that. Then I pursue it. But generally, my thought is, it used to be, why would anybody read this? And then I kind of came to the realization that I'm not writing for other people. I'm writing to clear my thoughts. So,
Yeah.
and that was the real purpose behind it initially. And then I thought I'll publish a few and see what happens. My blog posts tend to be eclectic, I think is probably the best word. And they tend to be focused on things like agile and transformation, innovation and promotion
Yeah.
and risk taking and all of these things. For example, one that sticks in my mind is, and I use this sometimes when I'm talking to people about agile. I have a blog that I wrote called "Even My Wardrobe is Agile," and the point about that is my wardrobe is not agile, but because the order of clothing in my wardrobe is of no value to me whatsoever. I don't think about it. I don't care about it. So therefore, it just falls into a natural state of where things are. And I use this example as a kind of an illustration of where you should spend your time worrying.
Yeah.
Decisions are not value. Shouldn't have any. They certainly shouldn't be front of mind. They shouldn't be in your risk raid or risk log or whatever. So the concept of just getting that thought down on paper, so to speak, and sharing with people that other people might think, actually, that's a good point. Why are we worrying about this trivial thing that matters to nobody?
I'm going to use that argument with my wife when she tells me I'm not putting things away correctly or whatever it is. How that works.
But there's another, on the flip side of that, I'm a great believer in risk taking, and I'm a great believer in, controlled risk taking, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think you'll be familiar with the one-way door, two-way door sort of filtering for risks, which is if a risk is a one-way door and you can't go back, pay attention.
Yeah.
If a risk is a two-way door, you can take a step through. You don't like what you see, take a step back. And it doesn't need the same amount of analysis and research and safeguards and so on.
Right.
Similarly, the whole approach to appreciating and recognizing when somebody is brave enough to take a risk is important to me. In EPAL, the engineer that we have, the lead engineer that we have doing most of the design work, he'd be the first to admit he was a little bit concerned when we basically said, no, you tell us how you're going to do it, rather than the traditional product manager, product owner approach, which is I'm going to specify everything, you just repeat what I said. And it was because we wanted to give them the freedom to take risks and see that it's actually okay to take risks and make suggestions and experiment and fail and learn from it and move on.
Right.
I wrote an article titled "You Can Go Far If You're Not Afraid of the Fogs," and the fogs is fear of getting started.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
It's not. People are not really afraid of failure. People are afraid of the consequences of failure. And I often say, if we're afraid of failure, none of us would be able to walk or talk. We're not. We're afraid of what will happen if we fail, whether it will affect our career, whether it will affect, how people view us, whether it will affect our bonuses.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, luckily in the role that I'm in, I'm supposed to fail. I'm supposed to show how failure happens. It's innovation. I'm supposed to show what you do when failure happens. You publish it. In my academic career, and when I published my first paper, it was advice from my supervisor. He said, because I'd spent 18 months trying to do something in signal processing that failed. And his response was, publish it so nobody else does the same thing. And that was an eye-opener for me, because it's very common in the scientific world. But in the business world, you hide those failures.
Yeah. That's a really great mindset to have. How do you share that with others? How do you sort of inspire others to adopt that type of a mindset that, hey, we want to embrace our failures, we want to learn from them, we want to fail fast? There's a quote, there's actually someone that Mario put on the chat here. It's similar, right? I mean, I think it's related more to a point you made earlier in the show about how Scrum is great for some things, but not great for everything. But his point also was about failing fast, getting work done. So, I mean, this is, I would say, is in most large organizations, especially, ones that are quasi-government, that mindset isn't there because it's this fear of failure, because the fear of the consequences of failure. So what has worked for you?
Well, when I was lecturing, I was a lecturer in software engineering for undergrad and postgraduate students. And one of the courses I lectured was software testing. And a point that I kept making to students is the purpose of software testing is not to prove that a product is working perfectly, because you can never prove a negative, right? You can't prove that there are no problems or bugs.
Yeah.
The purpose of software testing is to identify the things that are likely to go wrong and identify ways of handling them. So given that software testing and all testing in general is about finding problems, how can we start by saying there are no problems and we can't pretend that just brush them under the carpet? It's just illogical.
Yeah.
When it comes to talking to executives and let's say project and program managers, the key is to find the failures, the problems, if you want to call them that, early as possible. Identify how to mitigate them. Make sure that those mitigations are acceptable and move on. When you inevitably, when you're building software, you're going to have bugs. When you're building products, you're going to have unexpected use cases, unexpected problems. It's going to happen. So you accept that, a bit like regulatory change. It's going to happen. So you find a way of dealing with it. And for me, what works is being as direct and upfront about it as possible, but particularly focusing on what did I learn from this, or what did we learn from this? What are the takeaways that we can have for this that A, prevent us doing it again in the future, but B, prevent our colleagues and partners and so on from suffering the same problems in the future. So transparency is probably the most important thing. The two things that pop into my mind at the moment is, in a previous client, when we were creating an innovation lab from scratch for a very large pension fund accounting firm, very large worldwide name, building an innovation lab, very conservative environment. People were afraid to, as you'd expect in an innovation lab, afraid to try things. So one of the first things I did is I created a status on Jira called, and the status was, "It's Ron's fault." And so it just became, a kind of a joke, right? It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Put it down on me. Let's move on.
Yeah.
So that became a joke. Whenever anything went wrong anywhere in the business, it's Ron's fault. But it did make the whole acceptance of things are going to go wrong.
They can put it somewhere. They can put it somewhere and not have to think about it. Yeah, I like that. You definitely left your mark there. I don't know if they're still using that, but
I have no idea. They probably blame somebody else now.
Yeah, probably. That's interesting. I should try that. All right, we're going to move into some lightning round questions, and then maybe a final sort of wrap-up question, and then maybe if there's anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share, we can go into that. So let's start. So these are meant to be quick, fun little answers, right? So coffee or tea? What's your beverage of choice?
Italian coffee.
Okay. Like cappuccino or just?
No, straight black Italian coffee.
Okay. Very nice. Complete the sentence. The most overrated Agile practice is, and then why?
Scaled Agile framework. Because it's oversold, not because it's wrong, but just it's oversold.
Okay. All right. What's the next big regulatory change that's going to create massive disruption and opportunity?
Well, for me, in my world, it's going to be how customs regulations are going to change in the near future. There's going to be customs duties on digital products in the near future. And also marketplaces are going to be liable for collecting and distributing those duties. For me, that's a huge opportunity coming. For most everyday people, I'd say it's regulations driven to drive AI compliance and so on.
Yeah, we never got to AI, but maybe that'll be the last question. What's the single decision or experience that helped shape how you approach innovation work today?
Oh, geez, that's a good question. Deciding to go to college. When I was in my early 30s, I didn't go to college, when I finished high school, secondary school in Ireland. And the opportunity came in Ireland because we introduced free education at third level.
Mhm.
And particularly for people who hadn't had the opportunity earlier, when I decided to go to college, it completely opened up my eyes to, first of all, how much I already knew because I'd
Yeah,
been in the real world. And secondly, how much could be um, innovated using technology.
very interesting. That's another thing you and I share, except I didn't actually go back and finish. I never finished,
There's
but
always time.
there's always time. Yeah, I'm only 60, so I still have time.
When I was lecturing, some of my students were in their 80s.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's
Two of
great.
them, yeah.
All right, one more. What's one daily habit or practice that keeps you seeing opportunities that maybe others miss?
Never assume that what's out there is right. So you mentioned at the start of the conversation that the status quo for me should always be questioned. Um, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. If you have a thought in your head that's like, why is this way? Explore it. Just
Yeah,
explore it. Just explore it for 2 or 3 minutes. And if the question still nags a day or two or three later, that's an opportunity for an innovation to be considered. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to become a
yeah,
product.
yeah. That's great. Love the advice. All right, final question. We are all being disrupted, more and more so by AI.
Mhm.
And you mentioned AI regulations governing AI.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? And people are talking about AI taking over all the jobs, and of course it's going to create some. But
Yeah.
um, what's going on in your mind about this?
Um, AI is a tool. It's a technology and it's a tool. When the Industrial Revolution happened, everybody said it will kill jobs, and it did, but it replaced them with other jobs. When the internet came along, everybody said it will kill jobs, and it did, and it replaced them with other jobs. When
Yeah,
electricity came along, everybody said it will kill jobs, and it did, and it replaced them with other jobs. When the motor car came along, it replaced horse-drawn carriages. Right. So
yeah,
this is the world we live in. It's constant evolution. And I think it's a spiral rather than a circle. Every
mm,
every innovation and revolution gets faster and
mm,
shorter. So for me, it's not about what is AI going to do. It's really about what can we do with AI that we couldn't previously do.
yeah,
I use AI all the time, but I use it in a controlled manner. I
yeah,
don't like with the internet. I don't search for something on the internet and assume it's correct.
yeah,
Similar with AI, it generates something. I don't assume it's correct. It's a
yeah.
starting point.
So that's good advice. I think more people should think of it that way. Although there are people that think that the singularity is just a few years away, or some people think it's a decade away. Some people think we'll never achieve it. But the pace of development in large language models and other sort of these technologies that allow for AI, it is really changing so rapidly. I mean, has changed so much just in the last year. So it just makes me wonder and gives me pause.
Well, as long ago as 2008, when I was teaching, I taught a course called Advanced Concepts in Software Engineering and Computer Science, and it combined nanotechnology, biochemical computing,
Mm,
artificial and generalized intelligence, and I can't remember what the other one was. There was four different concepts, and essentially, that if you combine those four concepts, all of which are real now, it's essentially capable of being a life form.
yeah,
That's a whole different set of questions in your mind.
yeah,
If these things can become self-replication was the fourth one.
right,
If these things can become self-replicating conscious life form, then we have a problem. But
yeah,
until then, we don't.
yeah. I guess we'll see how things go.
Indeed,
Anything that you'd
more
like to share?
change.
Yeah, exactly. More change. Anything that you like to share that I haven't asked you?
Um, no, I mean the obvious is if anybody has an interest in EPAL Global, they can contact me directly. Ron at epalglobal.com. Check out the website or YouTube. I would maybe for the sake of those who are interested, merchants in the US in particular or the UK who are shipping into the EU or want to, EPAL is essentially, we work on a freemium model, and I'm a great believer in giving people something that they can try a lot before they decide whether it's suitable for them. So we're covering the cost of the fees for the first 10,000 euros worth of transactions for anybody who signs up in the near future. That will stop after a while, not sure when, but it essentially gives people, weeks or months to try it for free.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think all the details I shared in the show notes on the various platforms. So if you have any questions for Ron, just please don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's on LinkedIn. He's of course, you can get his attention by visiting his website, and I'm sure you can ask him questions and he'll be happy to answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Ron. Really a pleasure to speak with you. We'll have to have you back on maybe in a year or sooner to see how things are going with EPAL Global.
Or see what else has changed.
Or what else has changed. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next week. Bye.